This is May 7th, 2022, and I'm Jean L. Hebert Brown, and I am here to talk about my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, Ida Mae Stone Sayre and Frank Sayre. My mother, Catherine Frances Sayre, gathered most of this information, and I've just reorganized it and made a story to go with it. The story starts with Ida Mae Stone. She was born February 15, 1883, in Sturgis, Michigan. Her father, George Augustus Stone, was 28 years old, and her mother, Jane Amelia Kedzie, was 23. She was born at home and did not have a birth certificate until 1942, when she applied for a delayed birth certificate, delayed registration, which was given to her on the basis of an affidavit from her older brother and her aunt, and a photograph of the family Bible with the registration or the statement about her birth. Ida grew up in Petersburg, Michigan. There's some pictures of her as a young person. Here she is at age 12 with Joe Crittenden on their bicycles. At age 16, she lived on Elm Street, which I'm sure these beautiful trees succumbed to the Dutch elm disease and are no longer there, but it was very pretty when she lived there in the early 1900s. Here's some more pictures of her as she's getting older. She graduated from Petersburg High School in 1901 and gave a speech at graduation entitled, "Is This the Solution?" This is a picture of the Raisin River, which ran through Petersburg. These beautiful dresses. These are the brochures from her high school graduation, which was in 1901. After high school, she attended Adrian College, which is quite close to Petersburg. Adrian College was founded in 1859 and was strongly anti-slavery. One of the articles talks about the connection between Adrian and the Underground Railway. It is affiliated with the Methodist Church. I remember my grandmother Ida as being very, very intelligent. She died when I was about 19, and I recall that she and grandfather had read all the Great Books series. She could speak and read Latin, and when we would go to the store, she would tally up the purchases as the price came up on the register. I remember her as being very liberal, voting for Stevenson. She was a Unitarian later in life. She was a suffragette, always interested in politics. She was a supporter of civil rights. I wrote to the college, and Noel Keller, the librarian, sent me information about the class of 1906, which was Ida's class. It states that she was getting her bachelor's degree and she was a member of the Star Society, whatever that was. The librarian also sent a page from the history of Adrian College by Douglas MacNaughton, where he states, "Fraternity and sorority activity included a tri-delt picnic in midsummer on campus, with 14 sisters present. The non-sorority women had their reception in October at South Hall, and Miss Ida Mae Stone, class of '06, of Petersburg, and Mrs. Burton Nessel of Adrian were hostesses. Miss Stone later taught in Anna in southern Illinois." In 1905, she wrote an article in the Adrian College magazine called Personality, in which she said, "One person has no right to say to another, 'I am right and you are wrong. I am correct and you are incorrect.' Right and wrong, wisdom and foolishness are relative terms and depend a great deal upon the point of view. As no one can see all sides of the body, so no mind can see all sides of a question. We have a perfect right to our own opinions and to abide by them as long as we do not infringe upon the rights of others. But we have no right to condemn another because he does not think the way that we do. Broad-minded people are always tolerant." On January 27, 1906, Ida wrote another article for the Adrian College World called "John Ruskin from a Literary Point of View." And this is her commencement activities. She gave a speech on the rights of women, which I imagine was quite short. This is her diploma from Adrian College and her Michigan State Board of Education College Life Certificate, which declares that Ida is hereby declared to be a legally qualified teacher for any public school in this state. And this was done in 1910. Ida saved 3 letters of recommendation. From Sarah Knott, the dean of the women's department, she wrote on March 16, 1906, "To whom it may concern, it is with pleasure and with confidence that I make the following statements concerning Miss Ida M. Stone. I have known Miss Stone for 2 years as a student of Adrian College. She is a young woman of exemplary character and has ranked high in all her work. She is thorough and earnest, and I think she possesses a marked ability for teaching. In addition to the regular college courses taken, she took a course in pedagogy, which entitles her to the state teacher's certificate. I heartily recommend her as one who will do good work in whatever position she is placed." Another letter from Herman Furman of the Department of History and Economics says, "Miss Ida M. Stone has been a student in my department for most of the time from September 1905 until the present time. She has the record of being one of the best students in the department, not merely from the point of high standing in class grades, but in the way of thoughtful recitation from day-to-day lessons, having received careful preparation. Miss Stone knows how to study. She knows how to prepare a lesson. Her mind grasps the essential points of the lesson and arranges them orderly. This requirement is a necessary qualification for good teaching, and is one much in favor of Miss Stone as a teacher should she decide to follow teaching. I take pleasure in recommending her as a young woman with splendid qualities of mind and heart, and worthy earnest consideration for any position for which she may feel qualified to apply." There's also a letter from the Anna School, which mentions that she was teaching Latin and German and music. This is a picture of a family reunion at the Kedzie home of George and Jenny Kedzy's Stone home in Petersburg, Michigan. And there's a list of all the people that are at this family reunion. And about the reunion, Ida wrote, "The reunion extended over 4 days. The first day they arrived by train about 4 p.m. A train came from the west about 7:30 p.m. from the east. They were bedded and served breakfast and supper in our home. A big tent with cots was set up in the yard, and the young women slept there. I think one of the beds was rented from the neighbors, perhaps 2. The second day's dinner was served to us by the local hotel, menu arranged by my mother. The third day dinner was served by the wife of the man who was then living in the old Kedzie farm just west of Deerfield, the home where all the Kedzies had lived when they were unmarried. My father hired transportation, but I don't recall just what. Perhaps some left that evening and more the next day, but the Smiths and the Fred Kedzie stayed longer. The whole affair stretched over about a week, and we had lots of fun. My mother was a good organizer." And this is another picture of the family, and the names of the family members are listed on the back in my mother's handwriting. And then after gathering this information about her mother, Ida, my mother then turned to trying to find out some information about my grandfather, her father. Petersburg was a small town, so they probably knew each other most of their lives. There's a picture of them in kindergarten together. And they both taught high school at the same time, and maybe that's how they reconnected. I don't know. But in 1992, my mother, Catherine Frances Sayre Brown, began researching her father's roots. She learned that Theodore Banta in 1901 had written a book about the lineage of Thomas Sayre, and if she could connect her father's family into this book, well, the work would be done for her. And luckily, she was able to do exactly that. She figured out how the ancestors fit into the Banta book. Then she learned that her father's family traced back to Bedfordshire, England, where they had resided for 700 or 800 years. The name Sayre is Norman and first appears on the tax rolls in the time of King Edward III, about 1332. In 1564, William Sayre mentions his wife Alice and their 4 children. One of their children, Francis Sayre, married Elizabeth Atkins. They had 13 children, one of whom was Thomas Sayre, born in 1597, and in 1638 he is recorded as being living in Lynn, Massachusetts. In 1639, he and his brother founded the Southampton colony in Massachusetts. He was appointed the town ruler in 1649. He was a farmer and a tanner, and he died in 1670. He had 8 children. The house that he built on Main Street in Southampton is still standing today. His 4th child was Job Sayre, and he married 3 times because his wives died, and he died in 1694. One of their children, also named Job, married Susanna Howell, and they had 8 children. One of those children was James Sayre, who married Susanna Seeley, and they had 9 children. The 4th child was John Sayre, born July 24th, 1767, who married Sally Brewster. John Sayre moved to Romulus, New York in 1794, was the town clerk, the supervisor, a member of the assembly, the county treasurer, a justice of the peace, an associate judge, a county loan commissioner, the first postmaster, and he owned a local hotel. He died March 4th, 1848. He had 11 children. His 9th child, named John, was born September 22nd, 1806, in Romulus, New York, and married Sally Brown, and after she died, he married Temperance Watrous. He and Temperance had 2 additional children. My mother acquired, for some reason, a copy of Temperance's will, last will and testament, and in part this is how it reads. First, I give and bequeath to my daughter Susan Sayre 2 feather beds, 2 bedsteads, 2 straw ticks, 3 comfortables, 1 white counterpane, 2 silver tablespoons, a set of china and forks, 1 carving knife and a fork, 1 set of white dishes, 1 set of Windsor curtains, 1 mirror, 1 set of china, 1 dining table and a tea stand, 1 washstand, 1 wash bowl and a pitcher, 1 carpet, 8 linen sheets, 6 cotton sheets, and on and on. It looked like she left similar items to her other 2 children, but it doesn't look like she left anything to the stepchildren. And so, the first child of John Sayre and his first wife, Sally, was George Carpenter Sayre, born in Romulus, New York, the 27th of October, 1836. He is my great-great-grandfather. He was Frank Sayre's father. He was a farmer until he enlisted in the United States Army in 1863 during the Civil War at the age of 27. He joined Company K, the 50th New York Volunteer Regiment of Engineers. His regiment was sent to Washington and from there to Virginia. In the Army Corps of Engineers, he was promoted to an artificer. An artificer was also known as a tiff or tiffy, and they would oversee the maintenance and repair of their unit's mechanical equipment, help develop new equipment, or become qualified on specific equipment. These are some pictures from the Smithsonian of the work of the artificers, the tiffs, and the work of the Corps of Engineers. And these are reenactors who were reenacting the Company K of New York. George Carpenter Sayre was sent to the Chickahominy River area to make bridges over the river, pontoon bridges. The Chickahominy was in Virginia, and it was named after the Chickahominy Indians who lived there, Native Americans. The upper reaches of the river became a major obstacle to the Union General George McClellan. He failed in 1862 to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond because the river, which is easy to cross when it's in dry weather, expands when it rains into a floodplain of swamps as much as a mile across. So the Army Corps of Engineers, along with the artificers, tried to bridge as much of the river as they could so that the Union soldiers could go across and engage the rebels. And these are wonderful pictures of this company from the Smithsonian. Sometime in June of 1864, George Carpenter Sayre suffered what was called a rupture, which was an inguinal hernia, while he was building a pontoon bridge on the Chickahominy. And then in 1865, he suffered an attack of inflammatory rheumatism and piles due to exposure. George was mustered out of the Army June 13, 1865, in Fort Berry, Virginia. He was suffering from his disabilities so severely that he was unable to return home alone, and his parents had to come and get him. When he was 51, he applied for an invalid pension because of the disabilities he suffered during the Civil War, and he was granted $8 a month. A year later, he applied for and received an increase to $10 a month. There are some letters here from his friends affirming that his disability is real and deserves some remuneration. And there's a letter from a doctor which is quite hard to read, but he does mention that George has no vicious habits. On January 20th, 1869, George married Adeline Dell Ball, who was born January 5th, 1849. They established a home and raised children in Petersburg, Michigan. His wife died of consumption, tuberculosis, April 16th, 1901. She was only 52. Included is her obituary and her tombstone. In 1880, a great revival was held in Petersburg, and George was converted along with 15 others and joined the Methodist Church, where he became a trustee of the church and for several years the church treasurer. George died on May 31st, 1905. His death certificate states he died of atherosclerosis. Included is a picture of his tombstone. George and his wife had 4 children. First, Nellie Sayre, born August 28, 1872, who married Fred Wadsworth. The second was Alvin Wesley Sayre, born September 5, 1874, and married Ida Karstadt. He died August 21, 1935. And the third was Frank Valentine Sayre, born February 14, 1885, married to Ida Mae Stone. Died in 1958. The fourth child was Cora Sayre, born May 17, 1889, married Herman Waterstadt, and died September 20th, 1976. So Frank was 15 when his mother died and 19 when his father died. This is his brother Alvin. He taught school for several years along with Frank, and they both left teaching in 1912. Alvin moved to Marshall, Michigan, and became a partner in a hardware store. My mother got in touch with Roxana. Roxana was the child of Alvin. Alvin had married Ida Karstadt, and they had 2 children, Wesley and Roxana. Roxana attended Albion College and became a journalist. She died in 1987, having never married or had children. My mother wrote to her to find out information about her relatives, as they are cousins, but Roxanne had little information to share. And then my mother wrote to Helen Wadsworth, whose husband's mother was Catherine's father's sister, if you can follow that. Anyway, Catherine was trying to get information about Cora, who was her father's sister, and Helen didn't have much to share. The last they knew, she was living in Toledo, but she had no children. And Helen didn't have much more to share, but Catherine did have something to share because she knew how to connect her Sayre family into the Banta book. And she knew that Thomas Sayre, who was born in 1597, immigrated to America about 1638, and in 1648 built a house which is still standing in Southampton, Massachusetts. He and his wife had 6 children, and we are descended from their first son, Job, born around 1672. Catherine learned that her paternal grandfather, George Carpenter Sayre, had been born in Romulus, New York, served in the Civil War, and immigrated to Michigan. She then finished her genealogy to the best of her ability. There are a number of missing pieces, but perhaps in the future someone will fill those gaps in. Catherine, of course, was looking for information about her father. she discovered that his education in Petersburg had been primarily a classical education with an emphasis on poetry, literature, music, biology, science, mathematics, because she knew that throughout his life her father always was a voracious reader and read on a variety of topics. One of his favorite subjects was being an armchair traveler. He loved reading travel information. And this is her father's birth certificate. This is a newspaper article which shows the Sunday school class that both Frank and Ida attended. There's a little mark above each of their heads so you can tell which is which. And here's Frank around the time that he and Ida got married. Frank Sayre grew up in a small house on Front Street in Petersburg. Ida, however, came from a more wealthy family, and this is the house she grew up in. On June 28, 1912, the Petersburg Sun newspaper reported the Stone Sayre wedding, which had taken place at the Methodist Episcopal Church at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday, June 26, 1912. The headline read, "A very pretty church wedding." The article went on to say, "There have been many very pretty weddings in Petersburg in the past, but not in a long time have our people witnessed a church wedding. The pleasure of witnessing the performance of this solemn, impressive, and interesting ceremony remained for those fortunate Petersburgers who were in possession of cards of invitation to attend the marriage of Miss Ida Mae Stone to Mr. Frank Valentine Sayre and in the church at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday, June 26, 1912. As usual on such occasions, as the time for the ceremony approached, everything was nervous. Everyone was on the go, all headed in one direction, the church. This edifice was comfortably filled by the invited guests. Promptly on time, the wedding party arrived, marched up the center aisle, the bride and groom meeting and taking their places at the altar. Here, the Reverend Earl R. Rice of Detroit, former pastor of the Petersburg Church, pronounced the solemn words that made the young people man and wife, taking the beautiful and impressive double ring service of the church. The wedding party consisted of the following: bride and groom, Mr. and Mrs. George Augustus Stone, parents of the bride, Alvin Sayre, groomsman, Miss Nellie Stevenson, maid of honor, Miss Margaret Mesmer of Detroit, and Eleanor Heininger of Adrian, the bridesmaids. Immediately after the ceremony, a reception was tendered for the young people, in which about 180 participated, at the home of the bride's parents on Elm Street. Here the guests were seated at tables in different parts of the house, on the lawn and the porch, and served a very dainty and at the same time elaborate luncheon. The church was tastefully decorated in green and white, while red, white, and green were the colors selected for the decorations of the house, the bridal tables, and the effect was artistic and pleasing. The bride was gowned in hand-embroidered baptiste, carrying a bouquet of red roses. The maid of honor wore blue chiffon over white silk. One bridesmaid was attired in pink, flowered satin, the other in blue. Ida wrote this: Petersburg was a small village, about 600 inhabitants, when Frank and I were married there in 1912. The date was June 26. We had a big church wedding. The hour was 12 noon. Almost 200 were invited to the church, and about 50 to the reception and luncheon at my parents' home. It was a clear, warm, beautiful day. We escaped with one of my bridesmaids and her boyfriend, who were going to Adrian. We spent the night at a hotel where we spilled rice all over the carpet. And the next day we came to Detroit. We stayed where Frank roomed until he found a place to live. Detroit was growing rapidly due to the expansion of the automobile industry, and many told us that we would not find a place to live. But we found several ads in the Sunday paper and hurried out. We found a newly made flat at 533 Maxwell Street and happily rented it for $20 a month. The building had 4 flats. Each flat had 4 rooms and a bath. No furnace, no hot water. So we soon had to get a second-hand coal stove and immediately bought a big tea kettle to heat water. The drain board of the kitchen sink was made of wood and was hinged onto the sink and could be lifted. Under it was a laundry tub. So we bought a washboard and a wringer. Frank put up a clothesline and pulleys. Since we lived in the upper flat, our laundry fluttered in the upper air. The place was new and clean and faced a vacant lot with some trees, so I did not feel so confined by the city. Frank obtained work as an electrician and joined the local guild of the Odd Fellows. Although Frank had no education in engineering, he was able to become an electrician and was considered a skilled workman. He worked on many projects, including the Penobscot Building, which is 49 stories high, for many years the largest, highest building in Detroit. During the Depression, Frank was unemployed, and after the Depression, Frank decided he wanted to work for an established business that could provide more steady employment than freelance electrician, and also to get a which is what he had been doing. So he obtained employment at the Fisher Body Plant of General Motors Corporation and worked there until he retired. She went back to Petersburg to pack all of her belongings that she had left there, because her parents had sold the big home and were moving. And they did a lot of traveling back and forth to California, stopping at the hot springs. And here's some postcards of Detroit, how it looked in the early 1900s. Because Jenny had lots of aches and pains that she wanted to get taken care of at the hot springs. Since this was Ida's first baby, She wrote about this experience, and this is her experience from 1913. Amazing as it seems today, I had not contacted a doctor. I was undecided about who to get. We did not know a doctor in Detroit. I had thought some of coming back home to be confined. I went to our doctor in Petersburg, and he examined my urine. He gave me the name of two men in Detroit who he had known in medical school in Cleveland. They were both homeopaths. I wanted that kind of doctor. That is how I knew to get in contact with our dear Dr. Hoff. Though I believe if I had known he was single at the time, I would not have gone to him. The nurses in the hospital told me that he was single. I finally screwed up my courage, found him in his office in the front room of an old house on Broadway on the west side. I told him I was pregnant. He reached over and punched my abdomen, and he agreed. He asked my age, and I asked him if he thought I was too old to be having my first baby. He replied in an irritated voice, "You are not too old." He reproved me for not contacting him before, but as far as I can recall, all he ever did was examine my urine, and it was always okay. Although in the last few weeks he suggested I go easy on food, as it was nice to have a big baby, but it was nicer to have an easier time. When he said that, I asked him if one could tell in advance whether one was going to have an easy time or not. He replied that any time was hard enough, and that one must be a good soldier and just go through with it. Then I was more scared. I enrolled in a club conducted by the Ladies' Home Journal magazine, and they told me more than anyone else. From the letters, it seems we were more concerned for clothing for the new baby than anything else. I never thought of buying a layette. I don't even know if they were available. On December 6th, Jenny Kedzie Stone, who Ida calls grandmother in her journal writings, which I have glued into my books and taken pictures of so that you can read them all yourself if you'd like. Read the extended version. This is the synopsis. Hopefully the best parts. Anyway, she wrote that Mrs. Quick says that few women wear maternity gowns now, but they just let their regular dresses out as they need to. She says you will not need anything for 2 or 3 months. I was thinking that by that time you might make a dress of some washable material, which you could wear after you go around again. Mrs. Quick of Adrian made all the wedding dresses for Ida's wedding. Ida had purchased a sewing machine at Crowley's on an installment plan, but I got so sick of making payments I vowed never to buy that way again, and we never did until we bought the 34 Chevrolet. January 16th, 1913, Ida wrote, I was downtown today and got some fabric for baby dresses. On February 13th, she wrote, I cut out my gowns this morning. It took me a long time to study out the pattern. There's no pictures and poor explanation. February 23rd, Jenny Kedzie, grandmother, wrote, I'm glad your gown is not hard to make, as it was hard to cut. March 5th, she wrote, I'm glad you had such good success with your gown. I'm glad you've got it done. Think you are wise not to try to make a coat. I'm glad that Frank objected. On March 5th, she wrote, I am glad you had such good success with your gown, that you've got it done now. I think you're wise not to make many more. I made my last house dress last week. I fixed up 9 sheets. I got little white skirts underway. On March 15th, Ida wrote, I made too many little white skirts this week, so I started the flannel skirts. They're so awkward to make, being so small. I feel well, but I get tired easily. The infant does a lot of kicking about. I have a big appetite, which was proof of good health in those days. On March 23rd, Jenny Kedzie Stone wrote, Aunt Nate says she has some things to give you. 2 dresses, a new knit jacket, and a nice wool shawl. I'm going up after them. She wished you good success and much happiness. She cautioned me about putting too much work on the little dresses. She says no one ever sees them enough, doesn't pay attention to them. But I've got one done, and it's so cute. (1915) When George was a week old, a sick baby was brought into the baby ward with the wrong diagnosis and shortly died of diphtheria. The hospital authorities immediately quarantined the baby ward and put the infants on bottle feeding. But Ida's doctor said if they're going to take it from the breast, they will be doing a disservice to the baby, as the baby is more likely to get the disease. So the doctor got a practical nurse and sent Ida home in an ambulance, and she was delighted. On May 17th, Ida wrote, I got home all right last Wednesday. It was about 6 p.m. Frank said the nurse was there. My, I was glad to get home. I got well so fast. Last night I had color in my cheek and my lips were red. I was so hungry at first, as I did not enjoy the meals at the hospital. The nurse takes fine care of us both. The doctor let me sit up today, and my head did not feel weird. I sat up without any proper pillow, and I nursed the baby. Tomorrow I can get up. Ida was unhappy with the flat they were living in, so she looked around for a flat that was being built a few doors to the south. She thought it would be better because she wanted a downstairs flat so she could take the baby out more easily. So she rented it even before it was finished, and the owner of the flat was glad to have a young couple in it. The nurse was still there, so Ida did some packing. The day she left, George was 2 weeks old, and she moved to the new flat. This flat had no central heat either, but it did have a gas heater and a tank in the kitchen and hot water piped into the bathroom. There were 2 living rooms that were bigger and 2 bedrooms. They bought a washing machine and a big ice refrigerator until they were able to get an electric one. They bought 2 galvanized tubs and a bench, and they washed in the kitchen and dumped the water in the sink. Moving was tough, Ida said. I felt so weak and my nerves were shaky. I remember how shocked I was when I snapped at Frank for not much of anything, when we got the gas stove connected and the coal fire going. But I struggled with our first dinner alone, and finally we got to bed. After we got to sleep, wouldn't you know it, George began to cry, and so I was up with him a long time. I didn't think motherhood was so hot. On May 29th, Ida's father wrote to her, Mama got home all right. She thinks we have a very fine grandson. I am certainly anxious to see him, and I'm coming down as soon as they begin to run the Sunday train. I enclose here a check for $25, which you can use for any purpose that you think is most needful. So with that money, Ida got a collapsible buggy so they could take it on the train. After they had been moved into their new flat for a few days, her mother walked in unexpectedly. Ida said, I was just walking from the kitchen to the bathroom with a tea kettle of hot water. She said, Ida Mae, put that down. You shouldn't be lifting heavy things like that. But I didn't obey her. Childbirth seemed to be considered something that women could bear. At this point, I think I will stop and call this part 1. And I will backtrack a bit. I think I'll backtrack to the birth of George and kind of go forward from there. So that's the end of part 1.